episode 28 of the Tyre Recycling podcast. We've been away for a short while, but we're now back again with a slightly different episode. I wouldn't say a very different episode, but a slightly different episode where we have interviews from numerous people. Ewan, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. I've been spending a week digesting the Michelin Bridgestone announcement on the rCB market framework. So we should have an interesting show here for our viewers.
Absolutely, and obviously, as we've sort of alluded to already, today's episode will be focusing on the recovered carbon black market, and also what could be considered a game-changing announcement by Michelin and Bridgestone after they have agreed to work together to help create a market framework for recycled materials, starting with where we are today, recovered carbon black. So Ewan, could you give us a bit more background to this announcement and why what we are discussing today is important?
Right. The recovered carbon black market has been touted for the past 20 years. And for as long as I can remember, when we spoke to people in the pyrolysis sector, they would tell us how they were working with Michelin, and Michelin had seen their material, their output, and they were happy with it. And in all that time, Michelin never said anything. And the suspicion from the outside was that, Michelin's technicians were testing material because that's what they're paid to do. And at the Recovered Carbon Black conference last week, Michelin virtually agreed that this is what they've been doing, looking at material, saying, yeah, okay. But what Sander Vermeulen did, who represents Michelin in this, what he did say was that Michelin and Bridgestone were now acknowledging that in the past they've been testing these materials, but there'd been a lack of communication upstream and downstream on what the tyre manufacturers actually needed and what it was they were looking for. As a result, the pyrolysis sector was pushing out material that it thought the tyre industry might like. And unfortunately, it wasn't what they were looking for. It's a little bit simplistic because even if they have the specification and the characteristics of the product right, the big issue is volume. It's hard to understand the volume of carbon black or recovered carbon black that the tyre industry will need. And we have producers today producing 3,000 tons, 5,000 tons a year in commercial plants. But if they're to feed the tyre industry, that needs to become 50,000 tons a year or 80,000 tons a year. It's a huge scaling up of production. Robert Harper from Certec, previously known as to us as Euro Ecofuels, commented that this was the biggest challenge that they faced. They were quite confident that they would be able to meet characteristics and specification, but scaling up from 5,000, 10,000 up to 50 to 80,000 tons a year was going to be a big challenge for everybody in the industry, and that it could take 4, 5, 6 years before this happened. So it's a long-term thing, but in general, it was what the announcement from Michelin and Bridgestone was very positive. It is a change to the market. It gives the companies developing pyrolysis plants and looking at new pyrolysis plants the chance to go to their investors with a slightly more solid proposal. It might be interesting to hear what Jens Elton Andersen from Windspace has to say, because they're looking at building a large-scale plant at Nyborg in Denmark. Really, I just wanted a quick word with you. I get some quick comments from you on the Michelin Bridgestone call to action. How do you think that will impact on your business, perhaps on investor confidence?
Yeah, we appreciate it a lot. I think we have been in wind development for many years, and then we expanded into recycling of tires 4 years ago, where there was supposedly the market for recovered carbon black would be kicking off anytime soon, 4 years ago. And then since then, not much has happened. And that's due to the fact that the tire producers, they use so much recovered carbon black, and they need a specific quality, specific quantities, and very secure sourcing, and no one was able to provide that. So I think that during the last few years, the tire producers, they have had this notion, understanding that they need to do something, because we cannot build a plant without having any security that there will be a market for recovered carbon black for large plants. And specifically investors that invest in the plants, they have been very reluctant until now, because they don't see any names that they know are buying large amounts. So this call to action is obviously, it's not a sourcing transaction. What they're saying is, we would really like to help you in order to get the market moving. We'd like to help you get the standards and everything in place. But what it does, it shows very clear commitment from their side to purchase if we're able to supply the right quality at the right time, at the right in the amounts that they need. So we appreciate that. So it will be much easier, I think, to acquire investors for future projects.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear some of the almost confessions that were made later on by Sander Vermeulen, that the industry hadn't communicated with the rCB people, the pyrolysis people. I, as an outsider, an observer, I had seen people for 20 years talking about dealing with Michelin, and it was, from the outside, it was obvious that Michelin were taking materials and they were testing them. They were saying, yeah, okay, we could do something with this if you could do X, Y, or Z. But there was no real commitment from them. I think partly because they didn't have the confidence in the producers to produce the volumes they need. And we now seem to be at a stage where I think Thomas Sorensson said that the sustainability issues have overtaken the cost issues, and that's another driver for the tire manufacturers. So
we have seen that. If I can just comment on that, we have seen that during the last few years, where it was quite obvious from the strategy from the board in all tire producers. They've had a very firm strategy to be more sustainable, but that didn't go into the procurement department in the tire producers, or at least maybe it did. But as they couldn't give away to the sourcing, the quality, and the quantity requirements, they simply could not get anywhere. And we're not there yet, because plants are becoming online in the next few years. So there will be a larger market, and there will be some product lines provided with recovered materials. But it will take time to to make a full market. But what's important for now, and the statement that they've made from Michelin and Bridgestone, is that they would really like, from a strategic point of view, to help them it's effectively what we do, right? They ask us to, or help us to, in the industry, to provide the right products in the right way so that they can use them. And that's where the communication is now becoming much more streamlined and direct than it has been for the long period that you have been into the market.
Yeah. I think this change in direction from, or change in attitude from the tire manufacturers, actually it must enable companies like Windspace to scale directly to that high volume, as opposed to coming in at sort of 3,000 tons and then working up, which is, I think, a very difficult situation to be in. I'll not mention anything.
No, but it's both difficult to produce a very small plant, to produce in an efficient way and very structured production line with only small production capacity. That's much more difficult than an industrial size plant, where you can have the knowledge, you can have the skill, you can have the workers, and the technology, high-tech technology available to provide what's needed for the RCB off-takers. You can have that for a big plant, but then you have the full risk initially. Yeah. So what's important, I think, the change is not that we are now secured off-take is there. It's not. So investors, we still need to persuade investors to believe in us, our suppliers, the technology suppliers, the consultants, the contractors, that we are able to build and operate a plant in an efficient way. But now we know the specific specs of what should come out of this plant. And that's where we're going. It is that we now know or will learn within the next short time, what do they need from the tire producers? And there's still some, we cannot make virgin carbon black. So it's simply not possible. It's not what's there. So we need to, both sides need to learn to adapt. How do we do this? Because we need to have obviously some kind of standard that we can apply to in order for them to take products, because they cannot take from one or the other if they are dissimilar products from all the RCB suppliers. So there's some learning to do within the industry as well. It's not just the off-takers of recovered carbon black and recovered oil. It is also within the industry to get an idea of how can we collaborate to make a uniform product to sell.
So we have from Jens Elton Andersen from Windspace. They're moving into the pyrolysis sector with a microwave project. Their investment is huge, and they're looking at a lot, going straight in large-scale production. So they need to persuade the investors that this is a good news story, that pyrolysis is going to work and that there is actually going to be a market. So we have it there from Jens that he's already had positive reactions from investors.
And moving on, we have another contributor to this podcast in the form of Henrik Selstam, the Chief Technology Officer from Wastefront. We have a few comments from him right now.
How do you see the announcement of this call to action from Bridgestone and Michelin impacting on your company?
I do think that it will make a change, because the problem has always been, structural problems. Like if you want to make it some recovered carbon black, it has to be a lot consistent, and it has to be a large factory, and then expect the tire manufacturer to try that product from that plant for 2 years before they actually sign an agreement. That's not possible. It has to be large, and it has to be a collective interest to make it happen. So I think cooperation between the tire manufacturers and the carbon black producers will be recovered carbon black. That will be a lot easier from now on. So I think the investors will look carefully at this now.
So one of the messages that seemed to come across to me throughout the conference was when the pyrolysis people were talking, was that their biggest barrier wasn't quite so much technical. Not that they would admit to that, but not that it was technical, but it was more about the lack of investor confidence. So you would say that this is a bit of a game changer?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. And because now we are sitting with competitors next to each other and discussing this openly, like there's a lack of standard, and we are testing things that is irrelevant for the product just because. It's been like there's a good expression that if hammer is the only tool you have, every problem becomes a nail. So people everywhere are using their technology and trying to achieve something that is worth something on the market, and the receiver is not, it's not appreciating the product because it's wrong, or if it's inconsistent or anything else, and the communication hasn't been there. If you meet the standards, then it will be accepted by the clients. So yeah. I think it's a game changer. Yeah.
Right. So there we have it from Henrik. Wastefront is looking forward to a positive response from the investors. They still see the challenges ahead, but they're still on schedule to open their plant in Sunderland in the not too distant future. We'll be back with Henrik when they put a spade in the ground in Sunderland to talk more about that particular project.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've now talked to 2 large-scale startups. So, Ewan, what would the impact you say have been on existing operators?
It's existing operators have got a slightly different take on this because they've already invested. They're already looking at scaling up. I had a discussion with Pascal Klein from Tyre Innovations, and as far as Pascal was concerned, at his level of operation, the market is already there. He has this huge contract with BASF, and he's part of the Black Cycle project. And in the future, he's got the hydrogen project. They're already working on their first expansion at the plant, and their third expansion, which is slated to happen in the not too distant future, should take them up to 50,000 tons a year anyway. But they're not exactly focusing on the tyre market. They haven't put all their eggs in one basket. And as a little aside, on the hydrogen side of things, one of the aspects of pyrolysis is if you run at around 1,000 degrees, give or take, you break everything down and you end up with a hydrogen that can be used as a fuel, a green fuel. But although it would only take Pyrum Innovations 6 months to get the plant up and running, apparently it's taking the vehicle suppliers 6 years to get the buses and trucks on the road. So anyway, of course, the major player who's already got sort of a foothold in the market is Scandinavian Enviro Systems. We're aware of their deal with Michelin. Michelin are building the plant in Chile to deal with their OTR tires, and they have I think it's a 20% ownership in Enviro. So we're going to go over to Thomas Sorensson and see what his view on this call to action from Michelin and Bridgestone is. So essentially the question is, Thomas Sorensson, how does this call to action impact Enviro's operations?
Well, of course, it's extremely positive for the whole industry. And as a background, I mean, we had very recent activities related to the COP26 and the IPCC discussions that has been the report that was delivered earlier this year regarding the very, very urgent environmental issues that we have to deal with globally. And when two of the largest tire producers, two competitors, really step forward in the way that they did recently here to present their ambitions to enforce the implementation of circular materials into tire production. I think this is fantastic for the whole industry, and for us, it even more put the pressure on scaling and building the capacity. We, as we have discussed before, we have a quite ambitious plan for capacity building in the next decade, and this is suiting our progress very well. And I think both our investors and the team here is very inspired by this type of engagement and proactivity by the tire industry.
Okay, yeah, it was in some ways as a bystander, as an observer, it was interesting to see theories being actually coming to light and being validated about how Michelin and Bridgestone operated with the recyclers. So hopefully in future this framework will develop a market where people can invest. So has this impacted positively on investor confidence, would you think?
Definitely. I think this is one of the early steps still from the tire industry to really show the direction. I mean, we have been, as you know, Michelin have invested in our company already to make a clear statement that this is of their interest, but now they do it together with Bridgestone, and I'm sure the other companies are also invited to participate in this. So we look forward to that. And of course, from an investment point of view, it gives a direction and a security that the tire industry really expects to utilize large volumes of recovered carbon black, and that the material, I mean, we have shown that during this year with Michelin running their Moto E tires with our material inside, for instance. So there are a few of those really significant changes happening now for real in the market, building confidence for investment in our scale up and other companies' progress as well.
So there you have it. It's great to hear from Enviro and the leaders in the market. We've heard, Ewan, from lots of players from what I'd say within the pyrolysis sector and within these projects. What are the thoughts of people still within the tire recycling sector, but probably a little bit further away from pyrolysis?
One of our favourite people to speak to when it comes to this sort of thing is Peter Taylor at the UK's Tyre Recovery Association. Peter has been around for a long time in the tyre industry. He knows everybody. He knows most of what is going on. And of course, the Tyre Recovery Association in the UK has a dedicated pyrolysis group. So we thought we'd ask Peter Taylor for his thoughts on this call to action. Can you tell us what impact this call to action for a framework and rCB will have on the UK industry?
Well, I think first of all, it will drive other new tyre players to look to their own laurels. So it will provide some definition in terms of what the likely uptake will be from the new tire players. As far as the UK is concerned, well, we don't make that many new tires any longer. So I suspect that the local opportunities in the UK will be somewhat limited. So that means we have to look to either export this material or look for uses, alternative uses where it may also be needed and be beneficial. And you know, there's a lot of talk about the use of recovered carbon black in cement curing as an accelerator in cement curing and so on. And look, I'm not technically competent to comment on that, but I think it would be a mistake to expect too much of the new tire manufacturers, at least until Asian producers can step up to the plate and be ready to take some of this material.
You mentioned end of waste earlier. Where are we with end of waste, and how does that impact this?
It's a big question, and I suspect the answers may be different in different parts of Europe. But as far as the UK is concerned, there is an attempt right now to come up with a quality protocol for oils, pyrolysis derived oils, and we will need to try to do the same for recovered carbon black. But in order to really attack that opportunity meaningfully, we need to know precisely what specifications are needed. Firstly, in new tire manufacture, and secondly, perhaps in other potential end uses. We're not there yet, and it's no good working on end of. But we will start to make efforts to work on achieving quality protocols for both oil and recovered carbon black. But we need a few more signposts than we have at the moment. I suppose one of the fears I have is that we in the UK will go down a road all of our own, and the end of waste requirements here may be substantially different to those across the channel, and that might disadvantage us.
Okay, it's always great to hear from Peter Taylor. So, Ewan, we've heard from numerous people from within pyrolysis and from a little bit further away from the actual sector in the form as just who we've just been speaking to, Peter Taylor. How do you what's your initial reaction to this announcement, and what's the, how is this announcement from Michelin and Bridgestone going to pave the way for the increased use of recovered carbon black in the sector going forward?
After many years of the tyre manufacturers more or less ignoring the recycling sector, suddenly they're paying attention. The Thomas Sorensson touched on this. The driver for recycling for the manufacturers has gone from a cost-saving issue to one of sustainability. Sustainability has now become the driver. And we've talked about sustainability in the past in the magazine, and how the tyre manufacturer's idea of sustainability is not the man in the street's idea of sustainability. We'll come to that later in another podcast. But what they've done now is they're actually going out and they're going to say, this is the characteristic of the product we need, this is a specification, and these are the volumes we're looking at. And if they do that, the industry can then go to investors and say, we've got a market, we can meet this demand, we can do this. And it will give investors confidence, and it will release funds to allow people to scale up or invest in large scale startups. So that is the first game changer. But the the interesting thing is, and it was sort of skipped over because this was a Recovered Carbon Black conference last week. There are intentions for this call to action to be extended in the future to cover devulcanized material, micronized material, reclaim. So it's a far wider ranging initiative than just carbon black, although carbon black is what it is focusing on at the moment. It will change things. There are challenges. The virgin carbon black people can have their fossil feedstock, oil, shipped to them, pumped through pipelines, and they can operate wherever they are. The logistics involved in virgin carbon black production are not the same as they are for recovered carbon black. And this might be an issue. Bob Genovese from Delta Energy suggested that if the source of the material was more than 300-400 miles from the plant was not going to be viable. So in the future, when this market takes off, the chances are, if the producers are looking to deal with the tire market, they will have multiple plants, preferably in proximity to the tire producers. But that raises issues in countries that do not have a tire manufacturing of any great scale. Countries like the UK, for example, we have great plans in the UK for pyrolysis, but we've got a minimal market here. New Zealand's another one. There are plans for pyrolysis plants in New Zealand, but New Zealand has no tire industry. So it's not all cut and dried. There will be changes for the positive in the industry, but there are still many challenges to be addressed.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good note to finish on. We could continue discussing this to the bitter end, because there's so many different facets of this announcement that we can dive into, but we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks for conducting all those interviews, Ewan, and thanks for your time for this episode. We'll be back very shortly with episode 29 of the Tyre Recycling Podcast.